Adventures in Babysitting feels like the night every teenager half remembers. A suburban phone ringing into trouble. A car breaking down on the wrong side of Chicago. A blues club where nobody gets to leave unless they sing. A kid in a Thor helmet looking up at a city that suddenly feels too big. And one babysitter trying to keep the night from swallowing everyone she was supposed to bring home. But under all that after-hours chaos, this night was harder to build than it looks. Casting the lead turned into a search much bigger than one babysitter role should have needed. Under the comedy, a real romance was running through the production most viewers never knew about. And the toughest thing the lead pulled off on screen is not the moment you would guess. These are 12 weird facts about Adventures in Babysitting, the teen movie that turned one bad night into a citywide survival test. In 1986, Adventures in Babysitting started as 2 weeks of free time. David Simpkins had never had a film made before, and he wrote his first produced screenplay fast. 2 very different movies were running in his head. Ferris Bueller's Day Off for the speed and youthful chaos, and Martin Scorsese's After Hours for the way one wrong turn could pull a character into a city that refused to let them go home. He fused them into one story. A babysitter, a handful of kids, one night across Chicago that fell apart the moment it started. Paramount read it and saw a clean opportunity, a female-led answer to Ferris Bueller in the same teen comedy lane. But the studio attached a condition. They would only make the movie if Molly Ringwald played Chris Parker. The math was obvious. 16 Candles, The Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink. If you were greenlighting a teen movie in 1986, you cast Ringwald or you walked away. She walked away first. Ringwald was already pulling out of the teen comedy lane entirely, and a strong script could not pull her back in. Paramount lost interest the same week, and the script slipped back into limbo. Then Touchstone Pictures picked it up. Disney lifted the script off Paramount's desk, the casting demand died on the way out, and the filmmakers were suddenly free to go looking for a new face. A no from one actress did not end the movie. It opened it up to everyone else. The director Touchstone landed on had helped invent the rating his own movie would carry. 3 years before Adventures in Babysitting, Chris Columbus had written a Steven Spielberg film so intense it pushed the MPAA into creating a new category. By his late 20s, he was already one of the hottest young screenwriters in Hollywood. Gremlins, The Goonies, Young Sherlock Holmes, 3 produced credits in a row, each buried inside the cultural memory of a generation of kids. When he picked his first film as a director, he refused to reach for any of his own scripts and spent roughly 2 years reading more than 100 others, hunting for something a first-time director could control. Adventures in Babysitting fit the brief, contained enough for a first job, big enough to matter. In 1984, the MPAA had created the PG-13 rating after parents complained that some PG movies were too intense for kids, but not adult enough for an R. The 2 films most often cited as the trigger were Indiana Jones and The Temple of Doom and Gremlins. Columbus had written Gremlins. 3 years later, that same screenwriter was directing inside the rating his own work had pushed Hollywood to create, for a Disney company stepping one notch harder than it ever had before. Columbus already understood exactly the kind of movie this was supposed to be, a children's adventure with teeth. He set the tone on set by handing his cast homework, Scorsese's After Hours for the dread, a Marx Brothers film for the screwball rhythm. Elizabeth Shue later described working with him as easy, with what she called a grateful energy on set. A young director on his first job, a young cast on theirs, and the one person in the building who knew what that rating was for had helped invent it. With Ringwald out of the picture, Touchstone went hunting nationwide. Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, everywhere a working teen actress could be put on tape. Roughly 150 of them read for Chris Parker, and the reason the script attracted such a crowd was simple. Elizabeth Shue put it bluntly years later in an interview with Vulture. At the time, almost every other script for a young actress made her the girlfriend. Chris Parker actually had to carry the movie. That was rare enough to pull every working teen actress in America into the audition room. By the final day, the field had collapsed to 2. Elizabeth Shue and Valerie Bertinelli. Bertinelli was already a star, beloved from One Day at a Time, but the casting team felt her version of the stressed-out babysitter came off a little too mean, a little too angry. The role needed someone the audience could ride with for 90 minutes of bad nights. Shu was a student at Harvard whose biggest credit was playing the supportive girlfriend in The Karate Kid. On paper, a long shot. Then Columbus changed the test. Instead of asking her to read lines, he asked her to improvise a dance, high energy on the spot in a casting office. No music, no choreography, no warning. Shu threw off every inhibition in the room and danced. Columbus cast her on the spot. The audition got her the role, and then it got something bigger. The film opens almost wordless. No setup, no voiceover, no exposition. Just a teenage girl alone in her bedroom lip-syncing to Then He Kissed Me by the Crystals, bouncing around in an oversized shirt, using the bedpost as a microphone, pulling the drapes off the window, and wearing them as a wedding veil. In about 2 minutes with no dialogue, the audience knows everything they need to know. She is romantic, she is silly, and she is the kind of girl who believes the night ahead is going to go exactly the way she has rehearsed it in her head. That opening sequence was the audition Columbus had asked Shu to do, stretched into a full scene, and it was reaching for something bigger than just her audition. Critics and audiences have widely read it as a female, more innocent riff on Tom Cruise's underwear dance in Risky Business, same fantasy structure, same alone-in-the-house freedom, same use of music as character introduction. Boys had been getting that moment on screen for years. Now a girl got to have it too. The film leans on classic soul and girl group music rather than 1987 pop. The Crystals, Sam Cooke, Percy Sledge, Edwin Starr. Music that belonged to the romantic fantasy Chris was living inside, not the chaotic city the night was about to drop her into. Then the film closes the loop. In the final scene, Chris kisses Dan as Then He Kissed Me returns on the soundtrack. The song that opened the movie as a make-believe serenade to a photograph closes the movie as a real kiss with a real boy. The opening number had been her fantasy. The closing one was her answer. The 15-year-old playing Brad came from the deepest bloodline in Hollywood. Keith Coogan was the grandson of Jackie Coogan, the child actor who starred opposite Charlie Chaplin in The Kid in 1921, the original Hollywood child star, who decades later became Uncle Fester on The Addams Family. His grandson walked onto adventures in Babysitting carrying that lineage quietly, playing a teenager nursing a hopeless crush on his babysitter. He was supposed to keep it professional. Love did not let him. Coogan genuinely had a crush on Elizabeth Shue and has been open about it across decades of interviews. By his own telling, his jaw-dropping reaction to her during casting helped seal her role in the first place. Then they started shooting, and the crush did not go away. At a cast dinner during production, Coogan raised the idea of dating with Shue, acknowledged the 6-year age gap, and asked anyway. She laughed in his face. In a 2011 interview, Coogan described what happened with surgical clarity. That's exactly the laugh she does in movie. She totally crushed my heart, and I took that with me for the movie. The rejection became the performance. Every scene where Brad pines for Chris, every moment of jealousy. When Dan shows up, Coogan was channeling a real laugh he had received at a real dinner. He has also called Shue a leader on set across decades of interviews, and in 2017, talking to ABC News, he was still saying it plainly. I still have a huge crush on Elizabeth Shue. He never got the girl. One of his castmates did. Everyone hated the cheating boyfriend. Mike Todwell lies to Chris, cancels their date, and gets caught at a restaurant with another girl. The movie eventually has Daryl kick him face first into his own dinner table. The actor playing him was 27 years old. Bradley Whitford was almost a decade older than the high school senior he was pretending to be and has admitted feeling awkward standing next to genuinely younger cast members. After the film came out, someone recognized him on a street in New York and asked why he always played that type. The comment got in his head and he called his agent, asking seriously whether too many bad boyfriend roles could damage his career. His agent laughed. This was only his second movie. You cannot get typecast out of a career that does not exist yet. The career fear was wrong. But off camera, while Mike Todwell was breaking Chris Parker's heart on screen, the actor playing him was getting along with Elizabeth Shue. Whitford and Shue became close friends during production, and that friendship turned into a real romance. Shue confirmed it in a 2021 retrospective interview with a single line. I actually ended up going out with him. The boyfriend the movie spent 90 minutes punishing was the one the leading lady walked away with. Sarah's Thor obsession was not in the original script. David Simpkins had written her as a Masters of the Universe fan, She-Ra and He-Man, the biggest toy line in America in 1986 and the safest pop culture obsession a kid in a Disney movie could have. Chris Columbus changed it. He was a lifelong Marvel Comics fan and had no strong connection to Masters of the Universe, so he rewrote Sarah's fixation around the Norse god with a hammer. Columbus has since joked that he had no way of knowing that decades later almost every major movie released would be based on a comic book. The swap became one of the film's best-running gags, Sarah wearing the winged helmet through the entire night, carrying a small toy Mjolnir, until the group ends up at a garage and meets Dawson, a tall blonde mechanic with a sledgehammer over his shoulder. To Sarah, he is Thor. And the casting hid one more joke nobody could see at the time. Dawson was played by Vincent D'Onofrio, who would eventually return to Marvel as Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin in Daredevil. The blonde mechanic mistaken for a Norse god in 1987 walked back into Marvel decades later as one of its most feared villains. A Marvel-loving director rewrote the script around a god and cast the actor who would one day come back as the villain. Nobody leaves this place without singing the blues. That is the line every fan of the movie can quote. Chris and the kids stumble into a Chicago blues club at midnight trying to slip out unnoticed. The band leader refuses. The rule of the house is non-negotiable. You sing or you do not leave. So Chris steps up to the mic and improvises the Babysitting Blues, turning the entire chaotic night into a song. By the end, the whole club is singing along. The scene exists because of Columbus. Simpkins has credited the idea to him directly, and the deeper truth is that Columbus relocated the entire movie to Chicago for this exact reason. The original script was not necessarily set there. He moved it so he could work Chicago blues into the film. The band leader on stage is Albert Collins, not an actor, not a session musician dressed for the part, but the actual Albert Collins, the blues guitar legend nicknamed the Master of the Telecaster, a recording artist on Alligator Records, making his acting debut with his real band, the Icebreakers. Shua's called it the high point of her career to that moment. I probably had way too much fun. It is still the scene audiences quote first. In the climax, 8-year-old Sarah dangles off the side of a 40-story building with nothing but a Thor helmet and her own grip. None of it was shot in Chicago. The crew rebuilt 2 stories of the building on a soundstage in Toronto with a giant photo of the Chicago skyline behind it. The ledge was 12 feet off the ground. The shot that looks like a child suspended above a freezing city was filmed on a set lower than most basketball hoops, with a harness selling the illusion. The wind was real, blasted from industrial fans on the side. The bigger problem was the law. Strict child labor regulations meant Maya Bruton could only work until midnight, and several scenes, most notably the train sequence, ran far past her legal cutoff. The production hired a Canadian girl as her double to take over after midnight. Every piece of the most iconic shot in the movie was an illusion. The fear on screen was the only thing that had to be real. The signature line in Adventures in Babysitting is not something you would expect from a 1987 Disney release. Near the climax, Chris grabs a knife, faces down the gang member who just stabbed Brad in the foot, and warns him, "Don't F*** ***** with the babysitter." That was the movie's switchblade moment, the point where the babysitter stopped running and became the most dangerous person in the room. The film uses it twice, which by later MPAA standards would push a film out of PG-13 and into R territory, but in 1987 the board let it through. Decades later, the movie arrived on Disney Plus in a cleaned-up TV edit. Don't fool with the babysitter. Fans pushed back immediately, not really about profanity, but about meaning. The original line is the precise turning point where Chris Parker transforms from the hunted into the hunter. Strip the language, and the transformation flattens with it. Adventures in Babysitting did not open as a giant studio event. Touchstone ran sneak previews on hundreds of screens 2 weeks before release. Let audiences see it early, and let word of mouth do the work the marketing budget could not. It worked. The box office climbed more than 40% in the second weekend, the opposite of how most movies behave. The film made roughly $34.4 million domestic on a budget of about $7 million, a profitable sleeper. The movie tried to come back twice, a CBS pilot in 1989 that aired once and was quietly orphaned, and a 2016 Disney Channel remake that fans rejected immediately. The structural problem was unsolvable. Disney Channel's content standards meant the edge had been sanded off before anyone started writing. One movie could put a babysitter on screen with a knife and a curse word. The other could not. That single rating gap explains the gulf between the two versions better than any creative decision ever could. The original kept running, anyway. The entire climax hinges on a Playboy. Daryl swipes one from the chop shop. The criminal's plans are scribbled across the centerfold, and the model looks exactly like Chris because the model was Elizabeth Shue. The Harvard student who had just become Hollywood's newest leading lady walked into a photo shoot built to mimic the most famous nude spread in America. Shue has called it the toughest thing she ever did on the film, then added one line for the record. "Please emphasize I did not take off my clothes for the shoot." She did not. Framing, lighting, and shadows did the heavy lifting, and the audience never saw anything explicit at all. What they saw was a regular portrait surrounded by a cast reacting like it was the most scandalous thing on earth. The reactions sold the joke. The prop was clean. The babysitter showed up and did the hardest thing on set anyway. 12 weird facts about the script written in 2 weeks, the 40-story ledge that was really 12 feet off the ground, and the sleeper hit that quietly handed one young director the next era of family movies.